Standing up in McKinney, this is According to Callis, episode 732, coming to you on the 18th of March, the year of our Lord 2025. And today is, I guess, somewhat of a bonus episode, which is to say, I haven't been doing episodes on Tuesdays for quite some time now, but I just really didn't get a chance to finish. I kind of had to chop off at the end there. I went about 45 minutes, which is really quite long for a singular episode. And I wanted to finish up and add a little bit more detail to yesterday's episode. I think I did a disservice to myself and to proponents of other options. So I wanted to jump back in here and add some more detail. All right, so we left off with the episode on the 17th, the education redo, however you want to pronounce it. And we were talking a little bit about the things that happened on March 15th, March 16th, and then, of course, St. Patrick's Day on the 17th. So then we jumped into education and the control, right? We have the control coming from the feds. We have control coming from the state. And then the so-called independent school districts, not so much. All right. Now, I know there's a number of different interested parties in this, right? The retired school teachers, they want their money. I don't blame them. The retired staff, if you will, they want their money. They're retired. They want to keep getting paid. And they're prefacing all of their angst over the HB3 that they won't be able to get adequate money set aside to pay them their retirement. Now, I find that challenging to believe that is going to be the net cost, but they have skin in the game. So I want to have a little deference to them. I want to be fair. So I will say this, again, just for the record, if you are a retired or soon to be retired school district employee, you should get everything that you were promised and everything that you've earned. I'm not looking to take anything out of the way. I will point out to you that much like Social Security, it is a bit of a Ponzi scheme. And as inflation cranks up, the money you're going to get, no matter what the amount you were promised is, will become worth less and less as time goes on. So long as you understand that and also fully realize that whatever cost of living adjustments that you might see will really never, ever keep pace with how things are going, I'm just going to ask you to be at peace with that. And I am not your enemy, by the way. Again, if you've earned something, you should get it. If promises were made, promises should be kept. Now, whether you like Trump or hate Trump, that's one of the things that he has tried to do well is make promises that he actually keeps on the campaign trail. Again, you don't have to like him, but at least acknowledge that's something that he attempts to do, which is more than we can say about a lot of other elected officials. So we've got saddled with HB3, which I have likened to bait and switch, right? They're telling you you're going to get school choice. They're telling you that it's going to be a voucher program. I'm here to tell you that while that sounds well and good, I don't think that's what we're going to end up with, and I don't think that's the end game. I believe the end game is they want control over all the education that's going on in the state of Texas. And the way they can do that is by suckering you with quote-unquote free money or letting you keep your own money. Often I've thought to myself that it is an expense, it is an extra cost to educate your children outside of the government school system. I think it's like that by design, and even with my what I call novel idea of giving you a discount for not actually utilizing the government school system, I don't think that's going to alleviate the weeping and gnashing of teeth of the educators and the educrat class that depends on more money every year to justify their ballooning expenses and expense accounts. I don't think we can honestly make an argument that school districts are run smarter and more efficient than any private school out there. And it doesn't matter if it's a parochial school, private school, or for-profit school. Now, I would tell you that for-profit schools, at least in theory, will provide an adequate education or they don't stay in business. I will tell you that the private-public partnership schools. I can't think of the correct term right now, and it really doesn't matter. You'll see them. They're out there. They are forced to meet certain requirements so they don't get their money. And they are allowed to try some innovative things. But again, they're still under control of the district. Only when you're at a truly private school or you're homeschooling do you have control over the education your children are getting. Now, once upon a time, the claim was you're getting a lesser education. Once upon a time is your homeschooled student is missing out. They're not getting all the things that they could get at a government education facility. And just to be clear, the public-private schools, aka charter schools, right? So I believe the main course of action, what is at play here, whether you want to call it Abbott's play or whatever, they want all forms of education to be under the thumb of government. So a charter school is free to do a couple things differently, or maybe have uniforms, or institute some different rules, but all their primary stuff has to be approved by the state. Private schools have the ability to use a different curriculum. They have different controls. But when they institute this voucher program, they're going to require that these private schools meet certain requirements in order to be eligible for the parents to get the vouchers. Now, we've talked a little bit about this before. This is really an opportunity for government to reach into the formerly independent private schools and mandate they do certain things, whether they like it or not. Likewise, if you're a homeschooler and you want to take advantage of the voucher, aka get some of your own money back, you're going to have to submit certain things to be monitored and or controlled by government. Now, anybody that's gone to the trouble to homeschool or unschool their children, I can't see any way, shape, or form where they would think that is a good idea, that they would apply to quote-unquote get their money back when they know they're going to have to give up the very control they sought out in the first place. And again, keeping in mind, and we've talked about this many times before, the state of Texas already has some of the best homeschool protections there are based upon the pioneering efforts of local homeschooling people. Why would you throw that all away for just a little bit of money? But private schools, they're kind of suckers for the free money. They just are. Now, some parochial schools are a little bit better than others as far as kind of keeping tabs on what the strings are. But those strings are never obvious at first. They're little threads. You never really see them until later on. You get used to getting that money. It's the same thing playing out like the feds did to the government schools, right? Those formerly independent school districts. The state and the feds did that to them, and now they're looking to duplicate that same process with private schools. And the question is, will you fall for it? Will you get sucked into this trap? Think about it. That funding always comes with control. If you doubt me, then you hadn't been paying attention. So who really gains, right? See, this is the thing. The folks on the left are worried about all this money that is going to go to, quote, private schools, for-profit schools. And that may in fact happen. There will be some private schools that get in there and get some of that free money. And I think it's really they're afraid of the competition, right? Because they already get, quote, that free money. And now somebody else is going to get, quote, that free money. And they're going to be in competition fighting for that money. But the reality is it's not their money to begin with. It's our money. And we've determined that we find a value in a certain level of education for a population. So we've chosen to invest it in the government education system to provide a minimum base of education. But once again, I'll ask you, what percentage of students were considered literate back in 1789 versus now? What's changed between 1789 versus now? Have those changes been met head on, or have they been ignored and swept under the rug? Have those criterias been altered at all over that time? Do you really know? Is this a proper measurement of literacy then versus now? I'll submit to you, there have been a whole lot of other things going on while government's been taking over education. Some of it's been caused by government. Some of it has been instigated by government rather than brought about fully by government. And we pay the long-term costs of that. We deal with the shortcomings by that intrusion. It should be a very simple thing. You, the parent or grandparents or extended family, have the vested interest in little Johnny or little Mary being successful in their life, being well educated so that they can function. But depending on where you're living, depending on what lifestyle you're accustomed to, that education might in fact look differently. There might be different things that you might choose to focus on. But when you have a one-size-fits-all top-down organization, which is what we've gotten out of the U.S. Department of Education, to a lesser extent, but much of the same thing has come from the Texas Education Association, right? They've determined that what works here works everywhere. What we think is best must be done everywhere. These, what should have been, we'll call them best practices to base your program off of, have become mandates, have been benchmarks. I mean, do you really think it's fair to compare, and again, excuse me, because I'm going to use generalizations, and they're not my generalizations. They're ones that I've heard many, many times from both the left and some on the right when they're talking about certain areas of the state of Texas. So I got to put that proviso in there. But if you've got a bunch of, we'll just say, poor rednecks or poor black folk in East Texas, can you really compare them straight and evenly to some kids in a Fort Worth or a Richardson school district? Likewise, if you got somebody down in Rio Grande Valley who, for many of them, English is in fact a second language, even though they're Texians, or actually technically they'd probably be Tejanos, that have been here for generations, but they speak Spanish at home, or maybe they speak Spanish in their community and they're learning in English. And most of those districts are quote unquote very poor. Can you compare them fairly? And then when you deal with other areas of our state where they're inundated by, we'll call them fresh arrivals, whether they're from any other part of the world, and they have to accommodate, those districts have to accommodate those needs. How do they do it? How do they do it well? Is that a fair comparison? Is it a level playing field? I would suggest to you that no, it's not. And it really can't be. No matter how much you chop off the legs in Plano ISD or Southlake ISD, that's not going to change the outcomes dramatically in some of these other districts. But what you can do is focus on what works. Focus on implementing appropriate things for the area, for the population that's there. That doesn't mean that you dream up a plan in Austin and put it out statewide, and that's going to work everywhere equally in the state. The whole idea of, quote, being an independent school district was that school district could figure out what works best for the population that they serve and accommodate the populations that's there and get them in a much better place. And sometimes the changes or improvements are not overnight. It may take a generation. It may take a decade or two, because that's what you're dealing with, depending on where you're starting at. I've often found it interesting that, we have these very high requirements on people that become citizens, and there are all these classes that they have to take, and they have to pass the citizenship test in order to become good citizens that have migrated here from somewhere else. Yet if you were to take the vast majority of 8th graders in the United States, I'm fairly certain that very few of them could actually pass that test. In fact, not knowing what's on the test, I've often thought, and again, I'm a poli-sci history major. I'm pretty knowledgeable on these things. I'm not 100% certain I could pass that test without knowing what's on it. I'm fairly certain, I'm very confident that I could get a passing score, but I don't know that I could ace it. Now, what's interestingly enough is a lot of these new immigrants that have come here and they've gone through the process, getting their green card and becoming citizens, they might, in fact, learn that stuff and then promptly forget it after they've passed the test. I mean, we've all been there, right? You took a class in college or even a class in high school that you weren't interested in, but you learned just enough so that you could get that passing grade so you can move on to the next thing that you actually like. Again, that's education. That's how it works. Whether we want to admit it or not, people, when put in a position where they have to master something at least temporarily in order to move on to the next thing that they actually care about, are going to do that. It's built into human nature. You learn just enough to be able to move on to the next thing. Perhaps if we thought about our education as an opportunity to help people improve themselves. They talk about the independent study plans. Now, granted, you can't have 3,000 independent study plans in each high school. It's just not practical. But what you could have is a number of tracks. You could have a number of pathways, if you will. That would require doing things a little differently. That might require divvying up the funds a little differently. The problem's always been our priorities. We want a Class A education program, but we put all of our money into stadiums or other activities that aren't having to do first and foremost with the education, because that's what the general public sees. And then you have these individual, we'll call them niche programs, that parents depend upon to give their children something that they couldn't possibly get at home. And in many cases, they couldn't even get it in a good private school, whether it's the gifted and talented program, whether it's a foreign education, whether it's some kind of STEM program, right? Or even certain educational programs that are available through the Frisco ISD, right? They have that whole center where you can learn how to do certain, we'll call them blue-collar jobs, right? Skilled trades, if you will. A lot of school districts did away with, auto mechanics, electrical work, woodworking, metalworks. Our country is built on people that know how to do that stuff. Not everybody gets to be a white-collar worker and sit at their office all day. Now, it was convenient when we thought we could ship over all those jobs to China and India, Malaysia, Vietnam, right? But the result is we gutted the work that was there, that was viable, and gave people an opportunity to raise a family and take care of themselves because they were skilled at those jobs, those careers. Now, you can say that, and again, this is all related here, so stay with me, folks. You can say that, Donald Trump's evil because he put tariffs on, or you can say Donald Trump's a clown, he doesn't realize how much he's going to hurt the economy. But the fact of the matter is if you're competing against slave labor, which is what you're going to get out of China, and they're going to be able to sell you steel for less than what it's going to cost you to produce it here, well, if you're a company, of course you're going to take that steel from over in China. And I'm using steel as an example. There's plenty of other products. It could be footwear for matter. But of course you're going to buy that steel from there. But if we were to tariff it and say, well, that's fine, but we're going to incentivize those companies to buy products made here, and we're going to put that tariff on there, now we're going to create jobs here. And we're going to put people to work here. So that education that's funded by people living there and being in a small town or perhaps a rural area, they can stay because they can make a living doing that. Just like food production, right? Those small towns, those cities have dried up and blown away because we didn't produce anything here. So you can't fund those school districts with nobody there. You've got a dying population. And their solution is, well, we're just going to import people from another country. Well, yeah, okay, that gives you a number, but not necessarily people that have buy into the community, buy into the culture. So when we're talking about something as basic as an education to function, what is it we're really wanting? What is it we're really funding? What is the priority? Do we want good citizens? Well, that's what they sold us on government education with, right? We're going to train up all these kids to be good citizens. Now, some of this was the Protestant social justice or social It's social justice before social justice was a thing. Social gospel. There we go. It was this progressive social gospel stuff, right? So we want to convert these young Catholic families to become good, hardworking Protestants. I mean, if you don't believe me, go read the history books. It's there. Some of it was based on the Prussian system via Horseman, John Dewey, and the like. Some of it was the old barons and the steel barons. They wanted good workers. So they gave them a basic education so that they could know how to follow orders and listen to the bells and do what needed to be done. But again, was that what served us best? Was that ultimately the goal that we were looking for? They got what they wanted, which is why I always say the education system is working according to those who designed it. But it's not necessarily working for us, those that are utilizing it. It's not necessarily benefiting our country the way it should. So when you talk to the retired teachers, the retired vice principals, the retired whatever, they get very defensive because they were sold a bill of goods as well. Many of them were motivated by the purest of intentions. Many of them believed that they were doing what was best for the children, what was best for a generation, what was best for our country. I don't fault them for that because they believed it too. That's what they were taught. They didn't know any better. They didn't see the outcome of what's been happening. And they poo-poo and dismiss the very valid concerns that come with the controls. So they say, well, school shouldn't be a place for the culture war. Well, that's where the culture war has been taking place for decades. School shouldn't be a place for people to be made to feel left out. Well, that's how it's always been. There's always outcasts. There's always people that are less than. There's always people that don't measure up or over excel and feel ostracized. Now, whether you think that's good or bad is irrelevant. It's just the way it's always been. Schools can level some of that out, particularly government schools, but is that really what we want? Some of the education courses I took back in the day, they used the analogy of a cheetah. Is a student that is excelling in one or two areas really that great of a student, or are they really just a cheetah, which is very good at running fast? Well, I would submit to you it depends. It depends on what you're looking to accomplish. It depends on what you're trying to get out of a finished product, which is what students are, by the way. Whether you believe it or not, that's how the district sees them. A product. We get paid for the number of products that are sitting in the seats and the number of those products that pass this test. Now, whether or not you think that's good or bad will determine whether or not you have a priority to put them into private education or homeschool them versus utilizing the government education. And again, no judgment, because even in my wildest dreams, I could not possibly homeschool my children back in the day. Neither the time nor paycheck that could justify that. It had always been a hope of mine that I would be able to do that for my grandchildren if they were so inclined, or that perhaps I could go work at a private school when I was semi-retired so that I could train up that next generation, and I could teach them civics, and I could teach them government, and I could teach them to pay attention to the things that happened in the past, because they're going to be repeated, at least in part, now and in the future. Now, whether you choose to take that action or not, I can't control. But what I can tell you is, if you think that government is going to ever have less control by their own decision, you're missing the boat here. If you think that they're ever going to take that boot off of your neck, metaphorically speaking, long enough to let you get a good breath or perhaps get up off of your hands and knees, you're sadly mistaken. Now, it might be completely benign and they're just holding you down to maintain control for everybody's benefit, or it could be completely abusive, or they're slowly choking you out. I don't know. I didn't have your life. I don't know all that there is to know, but what I can tell you is I don't want anybody's boot on me anywhere, period. It has never been my desire to be subservient to anybody, period. We're supposed to be free men and women. We're supposed to learn how to function in a free society. We're supposed to want what's best for one another. Do you learn that in your education? Do you see that play out in your education? Well, I would submit to you that when we run our school districts, like, let's just call it what it is, right? A prison system. Yeah, maybe you think that's not fair. Maybe you think that's hyperbole. But it's a low security prison system. You as a parent try and go visit your student in class. See what happens. You as a parent try and go have lunch with your child unannounced. See what happens. You as a parent go pick up your child from that school district without getting their permission first. See what happens. Now, I understand why most of these things are in place. I do. And to a degree, I'm sympathetic to them for other reasons. But it's not the parent in charge at that point. They're your children, not the school district's children. They're your children, not the community's children. They're your children, not the government's children. But if you go ask the school administrator, if you go ask the government, in fact, you go ask some community leaders whether or not those children are yours or they belong to all of them, you'll be surprised what that answer is. Well, maybe you won't. So when we're talking about the school systems, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about funding, realize it's always about control. It's always about the product. Now, they may not say that up front. They may not want to admit it. When you look at a entrepreneur, when you look at a business owner, they'll be upfront and honest with you. I have customers, or I have products, or I have a service, and I'm successful based upon how much demand there is for my service or my product. I serve my customers. If my customers are happy, they will come and get more from me. And the more that I sell them, the more successful that I am. That is a basis of how good of job I am doing. When you deal with a system where there's very little or very limited competition for the product that you're selling, you become a whole lot less likely to worry about what your customer thinks. You become a whole lot less worried about what the outcomes are because they don't really have another good choice. And that's also what animates the revulsion to the whole idea of school choice. Now, yes, I think the voucher system that we're getting proposed right now in Texas legislature is not good. I will oppose what's put there. But school choice as an idea, school choice as a theory, fantastic. I'm all for it. But the details is where they get you. The controls is where they get you. Don't think that they're ever going to let you, quote, keep some of your own money or, quote, give some of your money back to you without there being another cost. The school districts have already learned this. They just haven't figured a way through it. You as a parent haven't experienced this. You don't know what you're looking at. Most of us don't know what we're looking at. But I'm asking you, wake up, pay attention. There's no such thing as a free lunch. TANSTAAFL, right? Just remember that. That in fact, that's going to be the title. TANSTAAFL. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. For those of you that don't know, that comes from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Go look up the book. It's not directly related at all, but it is interesting and it is fun. And with that, we're going to close it up. Just a minute or so under the tick here. Thank you for joining me. And as always, do me a solid. Like, share, subscribe. Follow me on the social media of your choice. You can find my podcast anywhere. Audible, Amazon, Spotify, Podbean, Google Play, and, of course, Apple iTunes. I think it's still called that. Podcasts, whatever. And I have a page and a group over at Facebook. I'm a pro at Gab. I drop in at MeWe. And I have a Twitter account. Don't use it a whole lot, but it's there. And you can still find me at the YouTube. With that, this has been According to Callus. And I will see you on the other side.
Canceled by the big tech mafia, but inadvertently profiting from owning their stocks in a mutual fund or ETF. At Two Pillars, they believe that censorship is a form of violence and a business practice that does not promote human flourishing. In many cases, through their investigative screening process, They can help you divest from companies that are denying your God-given, inalienable right to speak freely. Hey, Patriots, Two Pillars believes it's time for conservatives to align their values and investments. Two Pillars is your place for impact investing in the parallel economy. Find out what's in your investment portfolio with a complimentary portfolio review. Contact them today to learn more. Call toll-free at 833-377-0051 or send an email to info@twopillarsam.com. That's info@twopillarsam.com. Get started today. Advisory services are offered through Jacob & Boaz Asset Management, LLC, doing business as Two Pillars Asset Management or Two Pillars, a registered investment advisor in the states of Texas and California. Two Pillars is not endorsed by any government agency and is not engaged in the practice of law or tax advice.